What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, I'm going to give you my full review of the new LG Stylo 6. This was a highly anticipated phone for 2020, and to be honest, I think the Stylo is probably the one LG device people seem to still care about, which sounds a bit harsh, but it's kind of true. And unlike last year, where LG basically just re-released the Stylo 4 and called it the Stylo 5, which was a huge disappointment, the Stylo 6 is a brand new phone from top to bottom. This makes it pretty enticing for a lot of people, I'm sure, so I wouldn't be surprised to see the Stylo 6 become one of the more popular budget devices for this year. I've had my Stylo 6 now for almost 3 weeks, and in that time I've found plenty of things I like about this phone, a few that I don't, and through it all I've come to the conclusion that this is a really good device. As long as you can get it for the right price, and as long as you can keep your expectations in check, since at the end of the day, it is still basically a budget phone. There's a lot to go over, so I won't waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it and see what the Stylo 6 is all about. First off, I want to talk about pricing and availability so you can get a clear understanding of how much this phone should cost you and where you might be able to get it from. When I bought this phone 3 weeks ago, I picked it up from Boost Mobile. They have the phone listed for $180 right now, which I think is the best current price. But there are some other options out there. For example, Cricket sells this phone for $230. T-Mobile and their prepaid brand Metro have it for $250, and Sprint lists this phone just a little higher than that. Obviously, it may ultimately just depend on what carrier you can have, but the Stylo 6 really shouldn't be any more than $250, no matter where you go. And I think within a couple of months, like we see with Boost Mobile already, this should be a sub $200 device. For now though, I will just consider it at the higher $250 price point, and that's what we'll use for this video. But if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, I'll have some links down below in the video description to where you can get this phone at its cheapest current prices, so check down there so you don't miss out on any good deals. I think the first thing people will notice about the Stylo 6 is just how different it looks over last year's phone. Like I said already, this is a device that received a major and much needed facelift. And I actually think this is probably one of the most premium looking sort of budget smartphones, at least from the back. You're still dealing with mostly plastic, but the polished mirrored finish and rainbow effect look better than even some $1,000 flagship smartphones. It's also a really heavy device, and paired with the flat sides and boxy design, I want to say it's kind of like holding a brick in your hand, but that's not a bad thing. It feels really sturdy and premium. I think the one physical aspect about the phone that may not work for everyone though is going to be that size. This is a huge 6.8 inch device. It's the biggest phone I've used so far this year, and you notice every inch of that. Now don't get me wrong, I consider the big screen size to be a big positive, but the problem here is that the noticeable bezels framing the display increase the overall size and form factor just a bit, and you've really got some wasted space that makes the phone feel even bigger. It's mainly the top and bottom bezels that increase the height sort of unnecessarily, and I think if LG did a better job here, the phone just wouldn't feel as big. I feel like I'm sort of nitpicking with all this, but let me just complain about one more minor thing. The front camera notch is also way too big, even for a budget phone, but especially for a phone released in 2020. Overall, these are just minor little things, nothing that's inherently negative, and nothing that should keep you from buying the phone, but it is just a couple little things that I thought were worth mentioning. Around back, the Stylo 6 retains a physical rear-mounted fingerprint sensor. Now, I actually do like this. In-display fingerprint readers for me aren't something I find all that reliable or quick, and LG's offering here is fast, easy to feel for and find, and it works well. Even if it misses the first time, a slight adjustment will almost always get it unlocked a second time. The thing is though, LG actually removed Face Unlock completely from this phone, and really all their other current phones too. I'm not really sure what the reason was in doing that, but the fingerprint reader is all you have, which is kind of a shame. I know for me, I usually like pairing up both options to get into my phone as fast as possible. Also around back, obviously you'll see a whole bunch of cameras now, and this is probably one of the biggest upgrades this phone got over last year's Stylo 5, which had a pretty miserable single lens setup. The Stylo 6 now packs a 13 megapixel main lens, 5 megapixel ultra wide lens, and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. Up front, you've also got a pretty decent 13 megapixel selfie camera. Now, realistically, you're still kind of getting getting a budget experience, but the bar is quite a bit higher than it was last year. There's 1080p video recording, portrait mode, HDR, LG's AI cam, which I never really use, a couple other random things like flash jump cut, and a dedicated YouTube Live launcher, which is kind of weird, but no night mode, which is a bummer. And let's actually talk about what this phone does right. With enough light, the Stylo 6 does take some pretty good pictures. One thing that I really noticed is the detail. Even in subjects that were a little farther away, the Stylo 6 captures a ton of detail when you choose to shoot utilizing the full capabilities of the 13 megapixel main lens. The phone also presents the pictures in a more colorful, highly saturated look, which I know isn't everyone's favorite, but I think the balance is good enough here. It's not overdone and still looks relatively authentic and natural. Portrait mode is mostly fine, I think both around back and up front, and even selfies alone aren't too bad all things considered. I didn't really have any complaints. The one thing I was blown away by actually was the video capabilities, particularly with the steady recording mode enabled. This phone is super smooth when panning, walking, or even just trying to keep things still, and even the 1080p video alone isn't too bad. The main problem with the Stylo 6's cameras really is just when the lights start to go down. This phone doesn't really do a good job in low light. It can every once in a while, but more than likely, the pictures tend to be blurry and noisy, the shadows get lost, and whatever light there is in the shot is usually blown out. It's just not a phone I would take any serious pictures with past like 6 p.m. Also, this is one of those phones where the viewfinder makes whatever you're looking at seem like you're gonna get a really bad shot. The viewfinder in image preview is just terrible, but once you actually take the shot, it fortunately comes out much better. All in all, this is still a massive improvement over last year, and there's a lot to like. But with that, just remember to keep your expectations realistic. The 6.8-inch screen on its own is pretty good. It's an IPS LCD display with a resolution of 2460 by 1080 and packs in a decent 395 pixels per inch. Now, yes, you can get a phone with an AMOLED screen like the A31 for the same price, and it's going to look better. But I don't think the Stylo 6 looks bad at all for what it is. In fact, I think it's quite good, and I consider LG's LCD screens to be some of the best in the business. Viewing angles are pretty solid, there's not a whole lot of glare, colors pop enough, and even with a 1080p resolution on this big of a screen size, I consider it to be plenty crisp. It's really a good viewing experience overall, but one weird thing I noticed, for whatever reason, the Stylo 6 doesn't get as bright as you might expect. It's even a little dimmer than the Stylo 5 in my experience, and I'm not entirely sure what the deal is with that. Fortunately, when you're just sitting inside browsing your phone, it's not a big deal. I never needed the phone to be at full brightness anyway, and even outdoors in the sun, it's fine. There's no issue with visibility. I just happened to notice that this time around, the Stylo 6 seems to miss out on that extra brightness. Overall though, the phone's big, huge screen gives you a lot of real estate to work with. Watching YouTube videos and movies is fantastic on a screen this size, and especially typing, tapping, scrolling, and swiping, I never really felt like anything was in the way. I don't know that I could handle anything bigger than this, to be honest. Even one-handed for me, this phone is a lot to manage, but I like big screens, and with the Stylo 6, this is really as big of a screen as you can get for the price. Also, the out loud listening experience on the Stylo 6 is particularly good. LG offered dual stereo speakers with this phone, which is a pleasant surprise, and here's just a sample so you can get an idea. With one speaker down below and an additional one in the earpiece, I think it's a setup that is really immersive. It gets plenty loud, and all in all, this is something I personally value quite a lot. This good of a speaker setup is just not something you usually find on a phone in this price range. So let's sort of go over what all you can do with the Stylus, since it's basically the whole point of this phone. The Stylus is located down below, and this year LG made it so that the top of the pen has this little clicky mechanism to make it easier to pull out and pop back in. It's a nice change. It sort of mimics the Stylus on the Note 10, but that's pretty much where the similarities stop. The Stylus, for all intents and purposes, is simply just just a cheap metal pointer with a little rubber tip. It's not like a smart stylus, it's not connected via Bluetooth, there's no buttons or any sort of little extras, it's just a 2-cent little pointer. Now, if you want, you can use the stylus to tap, touch, and swipe your way through the phone, sort of like an old school Palm Pilot in a way, and that's fine, but you can do that with almost any phone and almost any random stylus you buy online. To get the most out of the stylus, LG includes a handful of stylus-related apps and features built in specifically with this phone. The few that I found most useful were Screen Memo, which allows you to quickly jot down a note on the lock screen, and the standalone Notes/Memo app where you can draw and write a bit more. The coloring book and scratch art are also sort of fun to help pass the time if you're stuck somewhere waiting. Draw Chat isn't something I use. It's where you can just draw little pictures and send them to your friends, but it's not particularly useful. And a couple of the other tools like GIF Capture make use of the stylus, but aren't exactly stylus specific. The pop-up menu that shows up when you take out the stylus can be customized to display any app shortcuts. So if you don't find anything beyond like the Notes app particularly useful, you can just exchange those shortcuts out for apps you actually do use regularly. And all in all, while I do think LG offers a fair amount of stylus-related features, it still falls short from what you might get from a Note 10. If you can utilize the stylus every once in a while though, I think it's worth having, and honestly, LG just offering a phone with this setup at all is great. The biggest negative really that I see is just the fact that since the phone itself isn't necessarily made for the stylus hardware-wise, and the stylus itself isn't anything special, you still get some lag and latency when drawing or writing. It's something I got used to the longer I used it, but it is probably the one aspect of this device that really shows that the stylus is an added addition to the phone rather than the phone itself being built for the stylus. When it comes to performance and specs, unfortunately, I think this is where LG probably missed the mark the most. Inside, the Stylo 6 packs the MediaTek Helio P35 processor, 3GB of RAM, and 64GB of built-in storage, which actually is twice the capacity as last year, which is great, and you can add even more storage via the SD card slot, which is also great. But LG doesn't allow you to move any apps to the SD card, so I don't know if that's really as big of a benefit as it first seems. LG goes pretty big in skinning and theming their phones over Android 10, so you sort of have to like or at least have already been familiar with LG's setup. Fortunately, you can make some minor changes to bring things a little closer to a true Android experience, even by just tweaking some of the phone's own built-in settings, which is nice. And you can see that's exactly what I did with the launcher and gesture controls. With Geekbench scores of 172 and 952 and a combined Antutu benchmark score of 103,043, you can sort of see what we're working with. As a whole, I think the phone actually performs fine with easy day-to-day stuff like social media, web browsing, video watching, and other third-party apps. Every once in a while for me, the phone would have a hiccup or get a bit crossed up with an app switch when I had tons of stuff loaded in the background, but I don't really push my phone too hard in day-to-day use. In regards to gaming, I actually found the Stylo 6 to be decent in-game. There was definitely some lag and frame drops from time to time, but everything is very playable. And even more graphics-heavy stuff like Call of Duty Mobile is pretty much fine. I think if gaming is your priority, there are better options out there, but for someone who just wants to casually pass the time, the Stylo 6 will work well. The big thing really is just dealing with the load times. It takes a while to launch and load some of these games, and that stems from the less than ideal processor and lower RAM. For nearly the same price, you can get a phone like the A31 with 4 or even 6 gigs of RAM, or jump a little higher even still with the A51 and get a much better processor and up to 8 gigabytes of RAM. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the Stylo 6 performance-wise. I just think for the money, you aren't getting the best bang for your buck when you compare it to what else is out there. And finally, when it comes to battery life, everything here is fine. The 4000 mAh battery pushes the phone through a full day of use, even with that big screen. The lower specs obviously help with that, and paired with a USB-C fast charger, you can juice up pretty quickly too. There's no wireless charging, but that's fine. All in all, I have no complaints with the battery. Overall, I think the Stylo 6 is a pretty good phone on its own. For the right price, under $250, but probably more closer to $200, this is a device that offers not only some decent value, but a few unique features that make it stand out in the overcrowded budget space. Compared to last year's Stylo 5, this is, I think, the phone people have been waiting for. But with all that being said, there are still some things that could have been better, mostly with offering more powerful specs. And I think looking at the long-term value of the Stylo 6, it may not last as long as a phone with more powerful processor or more powerful RAM that you can get for the same cost, or maybe just a few bucks more. So there you go, those are all of my thoughts on the LG Stylo 6. But what do you guys think about this phone? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.